Welcome everyone to episode one of the 3 and D podcast. We're your hosts, Rashab and Gabe. Just because it's episode one, I want to give you guys a little background about us. We're just two basketball junkies, enthusiasts who are tired of the clickbait, hot take media world, and we have insightful discussions about basketball where we get to share our opinions and our thoughts about what's going on in the NBA world. And we thought, what better way to do it than to share it with the rest of the world and let everybody in on our discussions. So, without further ado, I think this past week was a crazy week in the NBA world. Gabe, disagree with me if you think, but we had a trade deadline on Thursday, and it was one of the busiest trade deadlines in recent history. We had 10 days, 10 deals on the deadline day itself, and then we also had a couple of bigger deals in the week leading up to the deadline. So I think it goes without saying. Let's start with the biggest trade of them all, the Simmons Harden trade between the Sixers and the Brooklyn Nets. What are your thoughts? Let's start there.
Well, thanks for introducing me, Rashab. Happy to be here. Yeah, it was a pretty hectic deadline. A lot of moves, a lot of changing pieces in the landscape, and obviously on the deadline day, the biggest one, the Sixers get Harden, and they dish out Ben Simmons. Now, pretty big deal. And initial take was there was obviously a lot of buzz in this, and it was moving around in the background that people could sort of foresee that this was probably the deal that was going to happen, but they didn't see how or which parties would agree to it. And then all of a sudden, once it happened, it sort of hit me like a shock again. Like I can't believe they actually dealt them for each other. But based on how I guess James Harden's behavior was leading into the trade, I'm not surprised that it happened. But I do think personally, I like the Philadelphia end of the deal on that, mainly because in their particular situation, are able to pair up two superstars or all-star caliber level players that can actually compete this year and even the next year as well. Versus now, when Embiid would have been, I guess, wasting his MVP season on a roster where there was no other superstar talent paired alongside him. And I feel like from a Philadelphia point of view, Daryl Morey's point, the way Embiid's playing, something like an injury to their star player could actually derail the Philadelphia 76ers season, which it still can, but now at least you have an insurance policy with an all-star caliber player like James Harden to partner with him. So I do like it on that end. And also from the Brooklyn side, it makes sense for them because he didn't really seem that interested or committed to playing with them. So realistically, if you want to go all in, go for a championship, you really can't have that sort of attitude because it's not just James Harden potentially dogging it or not putting up his best effort. That sort of it's like a trickle down from the top. It would affect the rest of the team, and as we can see, the Brooklyn Nets performances haven't been great at all. They've actually been the worst they have been all season this time around. So, in a sense, for both teams, I think it's like a good sort of mini restart, and they can really position themselves to where they feel they can compete for a championship both this year and going forward. Those are just my initial thoughts.
No, no, yeah, I think it was somewhat of a necessary trade. But if we backtrack here, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, and then I can share my thoughts as well. In the weeks leading up to the trade deadline, we started to hear rumors about this trade. I know Morey had it wasn't a secret that he wanted Harden for Simmons and he was kind of holding out. But did you think this trade would happen in the weeks leading up to the deadline? Did you like what are your thoughts on that?
Personally, I did not think it would happen at all. I feel like we go through this cycle every trade deadline where high caliber teams are like, oh, if we can just add so and so, or this guy could be added, all we have to do is make a splash on the trade deadline. And in most cases, it's usually much easier said than it is done. But I guess this is one of those years where these two superstars have been linked together, and they actually do get a deal done for those two that everybody was anticipating. So in a sense, it's kind of surprised me that it actually got done because usually you just hear about these scenarios happening. It's like, oh, you can trade X for X, and it works out. But the fact that it actually got done, no, it definitely surprised me.
You know what? And I'm gonna disagree with you. I think this trade was bound to happen. I think when there's this much smoke, there's usually fire. There was too many reports coming out before the deadline, leading up to the deadline that one, James Harden was non-committal about his long-term future in Brooklyn. He would not sign an extension. He would not lock into his or opt into his player option for next season. I think that opened the door, and once that sort of seed of doubt is planted in management's mind, I think Brooklyn has they wouldn't be doing their due diligence if they didn't start exploring the trade market, because they gave up a huge haul to get Harden in the first place, and if they let him walk for nothing, I think without excluding the big three, we know that Brooklyn's short on pieces. They don't really have a lot of supporting cast outside of that big three. And now if one of those guys walk without anything in return, like I think Brooklyn's in trouble. So I think that this trade had to happen. I think is Brooklyn did the right thing. They did their due diligence. They were forward thinking in the sense that they had their doubts about Harden staying, rightfully so. And I think that they should have traded him, which they did. And then I think the other like clear giveaway is the Nets are on an 11 game losing streak as we currently speak. I think in leading up to the deadline, it was like 8 or 9 games that they had lost in a row, and Harden was dogging it. I mean, it didn't look any different than his days in Houston. He clearly had no interest in being there. He looks fat, out of shape. Like, dude was just disinterested in playing basketball. For the Nets, they didn't look like they get along. There was no joy in the team. They were, like I said, they were losing every game. And I think when you run into that scenario, if you have championship aspirations like the Brooklyn Nets do, you don't really have a choice. I think the NBA is a star player driven league, and it is what it is. Like if your star players are playing like Harden's playing, and that's kind of sending a message loud and clear that he's not really interested in being there. And this kind of segues nicely into the next discussion, where the best part about big trades like this, where everybody can see that something's going wrong, and there's so much smoke, there's so many reports, there's so many different things being talked about, is after the fact. You hear a whole bunch of stuff come out after the fact, and it's usually juicy information about the trade and what was going on in that locker room and what things were like. So I want to talk to you about some of these things that are now coming out, that are now being reported, and we have a bunch of things reported, but I'm going to focus on two of them. The first thing, there was a rumor, and this was reported. I'm not sure by who. I don't remember the source, but it was reported that Kyrie and James Harden, they didn't necessarily enjoy being around each other. They didn't necessarily vibe. They didn't necessarily get along. There was a game in Cleveland back in January where Kyrie did Sage in the locker room, and without getting into the Sage thing, that's a whole separate topic. We know people's opinion on Sage, and we know it's been brought up in the mainstream media before as well. But James Harden was a little, I think the word they used was perplexed by it. He was a little like shocked by what Kyrie was doing in the locker room, and kind of dumbfounded. And then Kyrie kind of took that the wrong way, and he didn't really vibe with Harden, and they were saying that Kyrie was eager to see James Harden traded. What are your thoughts on that?
In a sense, I think James Harden, prior to coming to Brooklyn, he might have had a different idea of what it would look like. Um, Especially with, I'm sure he's had discussions with Kevin. Like obviously they were been teammates before and probably buddies before that as well. And he probably maybe just undersold the impact that Kyrie Irving had based on how different he was from everyone else in the locker room. And then I guess once you actually got to experience it, or there was a scenario, obviously, like you said, in Cleveland where that actually happened, James Harden probably took a step back and realized, like, what am I actually getting myself into? Or does this guy not realize we have a game in, a couple hours? What's going on here? And I think at that point, you get to really sort of see your teammates and start questioning, is this guy really invested into like obviously playing basketball, playing with the team, or is he more so creating, I guess a diversion or a distraction for the team where the media focuses specifically on Kyrie, like just creating additional distractions to the team when they already have the pressure, being the most talented roster, I guess top heavy wise, on there, and then yeah, and then once that sort of friction starts, it probably builds up like every little thing sort of adds up, and then to the point where James Harden really didn't want to play there anymore. And in a sense, like when that happens, a lot of pressure gets put on the organization to be able to make a move. And like even like before when we mentioned if the trade was surprising that it happened or not, the only reason I actually thought it was surprising is because like it's sort of like a prisoner's dilemma where like Philadelphia knows you have to make a move because they know you have the pressure to win a championship, and James Harden's dogging it. but Brooklyn also knows that Philadelphia also has like a situation. And it's sort of like a game of chicken. Like who's gonna cave and who's gonna give up more pieces than the rest, and that's why I think Philadelphia actually gave them a pretty good haul for James Harden. But like obviously, once those reports start coming out where he's not happy with his teammates, specifically Kyrie, it just really adds to, I guess, the drama and the whole spectacle that the trade deadline really is.
Yeah, and you know what? I think I'm sure this is being reported in the media and people are talking about it, but Harden's obviously the center of this discussion. But I don't think people are giving enough blame. I don't think enough blame is being passed on to Kyrie. Kyrie has left every situation he's ever been in a negative way. He's had a negative impact everywhere he's been, whether that's on winning, whether that's on his teammates, whether that's on the people around him. He's very selfish. He's different. I'll use the word different. He's kind of like in his own world and lives for himself and doesn't really see the bigger picture, I guess I'll say. And I get it. He's fighting social justice matters and he's his vision might be a little bigger than basketball, but currently, like all that aside, because I'm not commenting on any of that. That's his business. What he's doing outside of basketball. We're focusing on the basketball aspect of it. I don't think like you said, James Harden envisioned one thing when he came to Brooklyn, and I don't I just
I
don't
think he
think
was sold an image.
he was. Yes, he was sold an image, and he fell for it. Maybe he got trapped. Maybe he didn't. Maybe that image could have been real. But I think Kyrie's uncertainty and his the fact that he's so unpredictable and so off balance, I'll say, in terms of how he operates and what he brings to a team, makes any sort of planning and vision with Kyrie difficult because you really don't know what you're going to get on a day-to-day basis, on a game-to-game basis. Last year, he took a 2-week hiatus mid-season. Like that is unheard of for a player getting fully paid, taking a 2-week hiatus. Yeah, you can say Dennis Rodman did it, but that was for 48 hours, and where'd he go to Vegas to party or whatever? Like taking a 2-week hiatus during COVID and then going to a club partying, celebrating a birthday, whatever. Like these type of things are gonna rub people the wrong way when you're not given the full story. And I think that's been the key with Kyrie, and he's not getting enough blame in this scenario.
Well, I guess touching on that actually, because I know when James Harden was in Houston and he wanted to force his way out, he was open to moving to Philly. But then again, you're at the mercy of your organization on to where they actually deal you. Do you think when he was in Houston, if he had a choice, you think he would have went to Philly instead of Brooklyn, or he would have picked Brooklyn over Philly the first time? Because it seems like he probably sort of knew he wasn't going to get along with Kyrie, and then like once they actually started playing on the same team, it just confirmed his thoughts. Like, yeah, okay, this guy's completely weird.
If I remember correctly, I think he had Brooklyn and Philly on his desired list of places
He
that he
did.
wanted to be traded to. Yeah, he did, right? Okay,
He
but
had
I
both.
I,
But
I
if he
think
had a choice,
I think, like you said, he was sold on Brooklyn based on a fake image. And I think this goes back to what I was saying with like Kyrie's unpredictability and him being so, the opposite of even keeled. He's so like off center all the time that you really don't know what you're going to get. And I think James Harden was kind of sold, I'll say it, a bag of goods. Like there wasn't that reality in Brooklyn just never took place. I think they played 16 games together in 2 seasons. Like that's brutal. And I get there's COVID and I get there's all that. And there's people missing time for unusual things, but um, I don't
that's
know.
that's
Like
not much at all. Like you need 16 wins to win a championship.
yeah, I mean, like they and they played well when they were all together. 13-3 was their record, but I think the media needs to focus a little bit more on Kyrie, and there needs to be a little bit more blame passed around. And I'm not a huge Harden supporter because I don't like the way he's handled these situations. But at the same time, I do think that if Kevin Durant didn't love Kyrie Irving the way he does in terms of his best friend and being a key teammate, I think Brooklyn gets rid of Kyrie before they get rid of James Harden in a heartbeat. But I think Kevin Durant shot that down. If they don't think that, that management team's crazy.
You know what? I think so as well. But I don't think you could have nearly got anything close to what you got for James Harden if you were dealing Kyrie.
You know what? I disagree. I think if you call up Philly, where Ben's and this is going to segue into like kind of what we're going to talk about later, in terms of who won the trade. Ben Simmons is not even playing. So if you call up Philly and you tell them, look, you got a max contract player sitting on the sidelines, giving you nothing, taking up what is it, 25, 30% of your cap, whatever Ben Simmons takes up. We give you Kyrie in a winning situation. All you gotta do is convince him to play, and there's no vaccine mandate. from all we know, he still wants to play basketball. He just doesn't want to. He just wants to do it under his terms in terms of social justice matters. Uh,
See, that's the tricky part though. It's the vaccine mandate. Like obviously now with what's going around, like I think we're leaning towards moving restrictions across. But the last thing you want to do is trade for a guy, and all of a sudden your state wants to impose a new vaccine mandate based on a new variant.
right, and that's uncontrollable. I don't think.
I
I
know, but
don't think you
Kyrie
can.
gives you that risk because
Yes,
he doesn't want to get vaccinated.
agreed. But I think if you look at it as Brooklyn says we can trade Kyrie, and because we can trade him, because Kevin Durant gives us the go ahead to trade his best friend, we are not going to trade James Harden. We would rather keep James Harden and trade Kyrie. And now you sort of pose that ultimatum to Philly, and you tell them, look, hey Daryl Morey, you're not getting James Harden. Best we can give you is Kyrie Simmons straight up swap. Take it. And maybe they sweeten it. Maybe they say, we give you a pick or something. But I don't know. I just think Kyrie is
I think Philly specifically, and it's probably with the Daryl Morey relationship. I think they put a real premium on Harden over any other star.
yes. We all know about Daryl Morey's love affection with Harden's game and his analytically friendly game, and I'm a huge analytics guy, and we'll get into that as these episodes go on. But we know he loves him. But again, this is about the pitch. This is about Brooklyn pitching it as you got 30% of your cap not playing. You want to win a championship this year. This is the best shot you got. But anyways, so let's segue from that to more sort of concerning matters, and this is kind of goes back to what I'm saying about Kyrie and how I think he deserves to shoulder more of the blame. um, there were reports that James Harden and KD, they weren't really talking for over a month, and James Harden had stopped communicating with other teammates as well in recent weeks leading up to the deadline. And before I ask your opinion on it, I want you to think about what I just said in terms of Kyrie not getting enough blame. This is like, think of we'll make an analogy. Think of you as a person in real life having a group of friends. There's two other guys in that group or two other girls, whatever, and you're the third person in that group. You're friends with both, but they don't like each other, and you're forced to pick the one side. Now, in this scenario, I think Kyrie's a more difficult person to like. I think Kyrie has more baggage. I think Kyrie, like I said, he's a little more selfish. And he's always thinking about himself. Not always, but he's thinking about himself in most times compared to thinking about the greater good of the team or whatever social justice matters he's trying to fight at that moment. And I think that there's got to be some blame given to Kyrie. Like he kind of like stepped in and sort of negatively impacted KD and James Harden's relationship. He made KD choose between Kyrie and James Harden, and KD had no choice but to choose. And I think James Harden, like he didn't like it in Brooklyn because of that, and as a result, his friendship and relationship with Kevin Durant kind of suffered. So again, I think that these reports, whether they're true or not, we don't know. But taking them at face value, I think again there needs to be the focus of these reports is very much James Harden did this, James Harden did that, and I'm not he's at fault. Don't get me wrong, but I do think that there's more blame to be placed on Kyrie.
So, firstly, with the reports, I think a lot of times is what generates a better story at the time. And just even towards this deadline, like I think media and everyone else could sort of realize that okay, Kevin Durant picked Kyrie as being like an untradeable. So the only one that actually could have been traded was James Harden. So now you see all this stuff come to light, like oh, James did this, James didn't do this, he did all this. So he was probably the more interesting storyline, which is why a lot of these reports are surfacing. With regards to how the situation is dealt, and using that example of being in a friend group, like personally, my take on this is that these guys they're adults, right? And the whole thing of like not talking to your teammates is pretty selfish.
They're adults with huge ego complexes. So let's
Understand, like
don't
they've
forget
been
that.
at the top of their game for years. They've been king of the court. They should have ego complexes, right? That's
Right.
how it is. But at the same time, they're also adults and they know how to deal with teammates. They've been playing with teammates their whole lives. They know how to talk to people, and just choosing flat out not to talk to somebody, it's to me it's kind of childish, but to be honest, it's the best way to get what you want done. Like James Harden obviously really wanted to move, and the best way to do that is just alienate yourself from the situation. Like the last thing you want to do, similar to like kind of like Damian Lillard in a sense, is like I want to stay in Portland. I want to grow here. I want to go through some of the growing pains to be able to win a championship and see. And it's sort of been like on and off for like the last couple of years. James Harden knows what he wants, and I'm sure he's seen it play out in Houston and OKC. It's just like now it's just easier to alienate yourself from the situation to get what you want. And most of the times you can get what you want, you get the move. You've already seen it. He's gotten to move twice in the last less than 2 years, mainly because of his behavior, not because he was being cooperative with the organization. Like, hey, find the best fit for me that would help. It's because it's like, okay, if you're not actually going to take my needs seriously, I'm just going to end up doing that.
Yeah, but at some point, that will be held against you. Like at some
It will
point,
be. Not
I
yet,
think,
though.
yeah, again, I think it's a unique situation where Philly had a guy taking up 30% of their cap, and we haven't even talked about the other pieces they gave up. But Philly had a guy taking up, 30, 35, whatever the math is on Ben Simmons' contract, take of their cap, and they needed to get off of it because Ben Simmons has also made it clear. So in this situation, it worked out. In another situation, if I'm a general manager or I'm a president of basketball operations and I look at James Harden, I say, okay, we have a guy who's ball centric, like loves his numbers. Yeah, he wants to win, but do we like he's got to get his and he's given up on two teams in 2 years where he's publicly dogging it in games, giving up on teammates, like just blatantly showing that he just does not care. I start to question his character. I start to question whether like what type of person he is. I start to question whether or not like how people react when they face adversity, how people react in less than ideal conditions, that's more of a true character of who they are. And James Harden acting this way in these scenarios is not a good reflection, especially doing it 2 year in 2 times in 2 years. Like that's just crazy. But okay, we can go on about this about James Harden and Kyrie and Kevin Durant forever. Let's talk about the impact and results of this trade. So who do you think won the trade? And who like you can define winning however you want, but I'm gonna define it as for the sake of this discussion, both teams' end goal for this season is to win a championship. So who do you base assuming that's your end goal for the season, assuming that both teams that is indeed what both teams wanted to do, who do you think won the trade?
So if that's the definition of winning this
How
season,
do you define winning? Let's put it that way.
well, like as an organization, like it's your job to make money and obviously be relevant and keep a competitive team in front. And I think what Brooklyn ended up doing was really, I guess, mitigating the fact that they really blew the James Harden trade in the beginning, saying like they probably might have had a better roster if they didn't even trade for James Harden, just with like how all their other pieces are, like Jared Allen's playing right now, everything like that.
100% agree with that.
So they had to
100% agree.
damage control, and they got, and I'll be honest, they got a pretty good haul from Philadelphia for that one. So like they did like whatever Brooklyn did on their end, they did a great job getting the best of what they could for a guy who didn't necessarily want to play there. But in terms of winning a championship this season, I think Philadelphia takes an edge on Brooklyn. And I think we actually might get a chance to see that because there's a good decent chance they might end up going head to head at some point. Like if those are the two best teams in the East and people feel that way, or even if they're in the top four, like there's a good chance those teams end up squaring off. And then you'll actually get to see how it actually plays out. Because realistically, right now, I know we've seen Ben Simmons' career and he hasn't necessarily improved much from his rookie season, like the way that most people would hope. But he hasn't played basketball in almost a year. Um, so to me,
Yeah.
he's still. I understand he's talented, but he's still like a paper addition. Like you still don't know if he's improved, if he's regressed. Because clearly he doesn't deal with stressful situations well. Like in the Atlanta Hawks series, like he just completely shut down and couldn't do anything.
So you know what? I wanna disagree with you here. I think not about who won the trade because we'll get into that in a second. I still want you to finish that, but I think you do know what you're getting with Ben Simmons because and I've heard this argument on all the other shows on all the other media outlets talking about, well, Ben Simmons is still a huge question mark. No, he's not because you don't need Brooklyn doesn't need Ben Simmons to be anyone who he hasn't already been. Whether or not he takes shots, whether or not he wants to be a jump shooter, whether or not he wants to shut down or not, they need him to do only what he's currently, what we have years of experience now. Ben Simmons is a three-time All-Star. He's been on the All NBA team once. He's been on the defense all defense team one time. We just need him to do what he's always done. If we're Brooklyn, like
But like I'm saying, I know what he's gonna do on the court. Like I know what the numbers say, but like you need him to be on the court. Like realistically, everyone's saying he's not on the court because of something Doc Rivers said in a series versus the Atlanta Hawks last year. Like, how insignificant does that sound? Like, you know what I mean? If something goes really bad in Brooklyn and Ben Simmons, you can just see from an attitude where he didn't want to play at all. Like, you know what I mean? It sort of strikes to me like he has sort of like that immature attitude, similar to Kyrie Irving. So you're putting those two guys on the same team.
That I don't disagree with. Yep.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, you might not necessarily know what you're getting with Ben Simmons because he could also quit on the team like James Harden did. Um, it's it's the same thing. So like until you actually see him play a game of basketball, like it's tough to tell what you actually have with that.
Yeah. So now going back to your original statement about Philly winning the trade, I do agree. I think overall Philly won the trade, and that's I heard this before, and I have to repeat it because I think
So sorry. I think Philly won the trade to win the championship this year. I think Brooklyn got the better end of the deal.
Okay, so I agree with that. I agree with both of those statements. I don't disagree with either of those statements, given the circumstances surrounding the deal. And I think I heard Joy Taylor say this on the Herd. Was it the
It,
Herd? Yeah,
it is, yeah.
she's on the Herd, right? Yeah, I think I heard it on the Herd where she said Brooklyn won the trade. I mean, Philly won the trade because they got a body. And I think that very well summarizes sort of the last year of Ben Simmons, the Ben Simmons saga in Philly, where he's just not even playing. So you get a guy like James Harden to come in place of Ben Simmons, who wasn't even on the court, and you were, I think, Philly's top two in the East. I think they're first or second. I can't remember. Um,
They're fifth.
they're
But all
fifth.
they are,
Oh,
but they're 2.5 games off of first. So it's
yeah,
all
yeah. East is very clustered up. I think the like 1 to 10 is not there's not a lot of space between seeds 1 to 10. But um, anyways, Philly I think is projected to be. I think we can agree they're probably going to be a top three team to end the year in terms of standing. So you get a guy who's all NBA caliber and James Harden to take place of a guy who wasn't even on the court. And yeah, you have to give up some shooting and some size and some defense in Drummond, but and Seth Curry, but I still think that the main pieces being going out here are Simmons and Harden, right? So for both teams, and I think getting Harden to replace a guy who wasn't even playing and taking up 30% of your cap, I think that's a huge win in and of itself. But
just to counter that, I guess. How like you could also look at it from how available was James Harden really to Brooklyn? Now, understand if the trade deadline passed and he didn't make a move, James Harden would have to play if he really cares about winning a ring that bad because obviously he's in his 30s now and he's losing time. So he'd probably have to suck it up and play. But I feel like Brooklyn sort of did the same thing where you get a body because they're assuming Ben Simmons is going to play and I'm sure they've probably talked to him like before making so sort of deals like, hey, you're going to play this year if you get traded, right? And they've also filled out other spots. Like Andre Drummond's probably a key ad for them, given that they don't have anybody that really plays the center spot. So they filled out, I guess, multiple areas where they actually needed just bodies.
yeah, I think you know what you bring up a good point, and it kind of segues into what I want to talk about next. And I don't think this is being talked about enough in mainstream media. I think this has kind of gone under the radar. It's been brought up a little bit, but do we think James Harden's regressed? I know me watching him play this year. I've watched some Brooklyn games. I've watched a ton of their highlights. I've watched a ton of James Harden videos. And just looking at some of his stats throughout the year, I think he's having his second lowest career field goal percentage, effective field goal percentage, and true shooting percentage. Um, he's pretty much at league average for true shooting percentage. And when you watch him play since that hamstring injury last year in the playoffs with Milwaukee, and we know James Harden's not a guy who comes into training camp, in tip top shape. He's got a thicker body type. He is generally not more on the lean side when it comes to coming into training camp. He the eye test says he's out of shape. And I think consistently playing like that or consistently being in that physical condition for a top level athlete where the margins are so thin, when you're competing against the best athletes in the world, that's going to take a toll. And I think personally, I think he's regressed. And I think that it's not being talked about enough. You watch him play, and he looks a step slower. He's still going to the free throw line 8 times a game, shooting 87% from the line, and his counting stats are still good. He's averaging 22 and a half a game, 10 assists, and 8 rebounds, which are still like all-star level numbers. But it's a far cry from the James Harden we saw in Houston, who's averaging 30 something a game and leading the league in assists and points at the same time. And he was a system in and to himself. I don't think he's that player anymore, but I think the good news is and we could talk about this as well. He doesn't need to be that player anymore. But the thing is, mentally, is he ready to not be that player anymore and pass on that torch to Embiid for Embiid to be the best player? What's their fit like? And do you think James Harden's regressed?
Okay, so the way I'm looking at it is I'll start with the James Harden point on regressed. I think he's had natural regression, as in, he's getting older, he's losing
Like
a
age
step,
related
fine.
regression.
Yeah,
Yeah.
age related. I don't think necessarily he's regressed to the point where, it's he's falling off a cliff and it's all like performance and skill based. I think in Houston, like you said, he was like, even though he was the system, he was a system player. The amount of volume of shots that these guys put up really helped inflate his stats much higher than they probably would normally be on any other team, unless they had a similar type of build. And obviously, the rule changes for how they officiate some of what he's, mastered his craft on getting to the free throw line. Like I know you mentioned he gets to the line, I think 8 times a game.
Yeah.
I think in Houston, though, that number was way above 10.
It was at like 11 or something. He was getting 11, 12 times a game.
Yeah.
11,
And
10,
then
something like
in
that.
a sense, like even those rule changes, if you want to go by like the field goal percentage, like he might be getting more contact that's not getting called. Because like every time obviously you get called for a foul, that field goal doesn't count as an attempt unless you make an and one. So like that kind of skews it a little bit where now it's like he might be getting that same kind of contact looking for a call and really, forcing the ball up to try to get the call versus actually getting the bucket. That sort of helps dip that field goal percentage down a bit because you've seen like several like even early on in the season like he'd be kicking his legs out looking for a call at the 3 point line rather than just executing on like good form, like actually try to get the bucket rather than looking for the foul call. He's regressed from an eight, like he's a bit slower, but we've seen he's put up some pretty explosive games in Brooklyn where he's had to where he gets like 35 points, like 14 assists, and maybe like 10 rebounds here and there.
I think you touched on it. The age related regression. I think for Harden, it's gonna be exponential. For a guy who's proven throughout his career, and we have evidence, career evidence now that this guy can't stay in shape. He can't come into training. He doesn't take his physical conditioning as seriously maybe as some of the other top level athletes in the NBA. Um, so I think the decline might be
But
steeper for
just on
Harden.
that conditioning point, I know he's obviously doesn't look like he's the best in shape, but before he's had these attitude areas where he wants to get out of teams, right? And then he starts to alienate teammates, and he all of a sudden appears on the injury report all the time. Prior to that, he was actually pretty good at being an Iron Man. Like he was almost never hurt, even with that bulky build. So like sometimes I even consider is like, is he really actually injured most of the time, even in Houston, in Brooklyn? Like I feel like he could probably play.
I think that's age. I think with age, like those little injuries when you're 27, 26, 28 years old, you don't really feel it, and that contributes to James Harden being an Iron Man, especially because with his like added bulk comes added strength, so he's able to take hits and stuff a lot better. But I do think that guys like him, they're gonna have a steeper decline because they can't stay in shape. Like that's one of LeBron's best conditions, the fact that he's so physically elite and puts so much attention to his body that he's able to maintain it. But anyways, what do you think about Harden's fit with Embiid, chemistry wise? Do you think like I think I think Embiid still has to be the go-to guy for Philly if they want to win. And I know bigs, like having dominant bigs in today's game. Today's game is very wing oriented. So I do think you need a dominant wing, and James Harden can still be that dominant wing. But I think if James Harden thinks that Philly's offense and Philly's system is now going to be how it was in Houston, where the ball is in his hands for 42 minutes out of a 48-minute game, I think that if Philly goes that route, they're going to fall short of who they actually are compared to if Philly tries to make him fit into what they're currently doing as an elite wing piece that they didn't already have.
So I think the fit's actually going to be pretty good. Only because like part of that age regression thing you mentioned as well. I think James Harden knows he can't have the ball for 42 minutes a game, and he probably like gets a little bit tired here and there. So it's nice to have a good fallback option or like a co-superstar like Embiid just for that purpose. So I think getting him to fit in will be fine.
I think you're underestimating it. I think you have to
Well,
factor in that.
it's different. It's not like it's a fellow guard or wing taking away those touches. It's a center. So it's not like he's going to necessarily be taking up spots on the court where Harden would be. You know what I mean? Like he has to be more of like a spectator, um,
Yeah,
as opposed to like sharing and spacing and all that stuff.
no, I agree with that, but I think you said he can't do it for 42 minutes a game as a competitor, as a guy who plays basketball like I've played competitively before, and we play together as well. Like this is just from it doesn't matter. This isn't just basketball. This is anything really in life. When you excel at something for so long and you're as good as these guys are, like we're talking about the elite of the elite, um, you might not physically be able to do it, but are you mentally ready to accept that you can't do it? And that's where I think the fit issues are going to happen. James Harden, we
I think he has accepted that.
no, I think we have a history of James Harden alienating everybody he's played with, superstar or not, to the point where he says it's not my fault, it's either me or him. He did that with Chris Paul. He didn't enjoy playing with Westbrook. He did it in Brooklyn now. Brooklyn, I agree, was not really his fault. I would say it was more Kyrie's fault. That's a whole separate topic. But James Harden has to accept that this is Embiid's team, and they're going to go as far as Embiid takes them, and James Harden is going to play the Kobe role for when Kobe and Shaq played together. Everybody knew it was Shaq's team. Kobe's the wing, so Kobe's gonna get the guy like James Harden's the wing. He's gonna be the guy who's handling the ball, who's doing a lot of the work, but it's still gonna be Embiid's show if they want to win a championship. That's what I think.
I think he's fine with that. Because I think James Harden's more concerned now with getting one ring, just getting that monkey off the back and then focusing on the other things later. But even in Houston, like where he initially wanted that trade request, right? He was saying it's like, yeah, we can't do anything with the pieces we have. Like I've done all I can here. And that's sort of like an admission of defeat, like saying like, okay, we've had stars, like maybe self-reflection. We've had stars come in here. And obviously like he blamed Chris and Westbrook for it. But at one point you realize like, okay, we can't actually get over the hump and win here. Like I alone am not good enough to do this, right?
Right.
And I think Embiid's still going to be that superstar only because Embiid's game is so different from a lot of the centers that are currently in the league right now. And it's because like the game has obviously shifted to more guards and wings and not it's moved away from playing in the paint where it's like necessarily clogged and stuff like that. It's more of a spacing game. So similar to like the NFL right now analogy, like it's a lot of finesse play. You want like the superstar wide receivers and stuff like that. So
Right.
like the guys that rush the QB, you're not necessarily like those big bulky guys that like bench a ton. It's more faster, agile players. And then it's like, okay, fine. Like something that the Patriots did, some of the games, it's like we don't necessarily have the best talent at receiver, but we're just gonna run the ball because we got the big bulky backs when everyone else is switching to more finesse guys who can catch the ball. But we're gonna beat you down with size and strength. And now Philly's at the point where most centers can't keep up with Embiid at a size and strength level. It's like, okay, he should really have a matchup edge on like every single team, right? Because not a lot of guys have guys who can outmatch him at that position now with his like size, build, and how he wants to play. So I think Embiid will still be the star because who he matches up with really gives him that opportunity to. Whereas James Harden, like there's a lot of star guards in the league, and you know what I mean. It's just more a one-to-one matchup, whereas Embiid should have an advantage on most matchups on any given night.
Right.
So it's like easy to exploit that matchup.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree, and I think it's going to be an interesting finish to the season. The Phillies definitely a team to watch, but I want to talk a little bit about the Nets. We haven't touched so much on what the Nets got, and we did talk about Simmons a little bit and what he brings to the team. But given our time constraints here, I want to talk about the Seth Curry and Andre Drummond impact. No one's talking about that. I think Brooklyn's defensive rating right now is 113, which means they're giving up 113 points per 100 possessions. That's ranked 21st in the league. They're 17th in three-point percentage, 25th in steals, 13th in rebounding. I think, like you said, Brooklyn did a good job getting pieces that'll complement their current weaknesses. They don't really have a big. Brooklyn didn't before this trade. I think they were starting Aldridge. They had Claxton in and out of the lineup, who's had injury issues all year.
They all are in and out of the lineup, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, and I think getting some stability, even though Drummond's not the value that he used to be, um, I think getting a big man like that who can help shore up your paint defense. He's big enough to guard other bigs. He's big enough to guard Embiid, who they might cross paths with later in the playoffs or in the
Mhm.
regular season. And then I think Seth Curry is a really underrated get as well. He's going to add shooting to that lineup. They've been missing Joe Harris all year. He's going to increase their 3-point percentage, attempts, makes. He'll just add another threat, a long range threat for them. I think overall, Brooklyn did a great job given the circumstances, like you said. I think all things considered, they won knowing that James Harden did not want to be there. They got quite the haul. Uh,
Plus, they also got some of the picks, right? Whether or not they're valuable or not, it helps you package on for another deal you want to make next year. Obviously, when they're still in a position to make a run.
yeah, they got two first round picks, which is pretty
Yeah,
good. Underrated. They got the 2022 first round pick, which is unprotected, and then they got the 2027 first round pick, top eight protected.
yeah.
So Brooklyn definitely made off pretty well. Now I want to talk about some of these other trades too. What was another trade that you thought was important or caught your eye?
To me personally, the Mavericks getting rid of Porzingis trade actually caught my eye, and I think a lot of people are saying they pretty much gave him away for nothing. But at the same time, I feel like he didn't really fit in to anything Dallas was doing. So you had like this skilled player taking up a decent amount of cap under contract, but they didn't really. I don't know if it's a coaching thing or just a matchup or pairing with Luca, but Porzingis really didn't fit there to where they were playing the best level of basketball that they could have. And what they got back in return was Spencer Dinwiddie, which, to be honest, I think they really do need a backup point guard, anyways. Because I think they're right now rolling with Jalen Brunson there,
Yeah,
and we all see in the playoffs because Luca, like the reason why like he'd have so many great performances against the Clippers, but whenever he was gassed because he's mildly out of shape, that's when all the other teams make a run at the Mavericks and they can't score a bucket whenever he's off the court. They also got David Davis Bertans back in the trade as well, who isn't necessarily shooting the ball that well. But the one big knock on Porzingis they had is that he was shooting his 3 point percentage at like a low clip for his career. So he wasn't even really meeting that pick and pop kind of play where he could actually hit knockdown shots from three. And hopefully Davis Bertans can get that. And what the Wizards get, they ended up getting Porzingis and a 2022 second round pick from the Mavs. And I'm not big on second rounders or that kind of draft. I think the Mavs are more in a try to win now and get the pieces they need to really get their superstar comfortable. And I think Dinwiddie's a big ad, only because like obviously that bench unit. Hopefully Luka Doncic can get some more rest when he needs to in between those games, because he's like a kind of guy who probably realistically could play like 35 minutes a game without, dogging it for another 5 to 7 minutes in the playoffs when he plays 40 to 42, where he's just out of shape and pretty gassed.
I think this was a terrible trade for Dallas. I'm gonna go against what you're saying. I think they absolutely sold low on Porzingis, and I think that they're modeling their team wrong. This build that they're doing in Dallas, their team building, reminds me a lot of early day Cleveland with or early career Cleveland LeBron James. Dallas is too Luka centric.
That team
They
went to the
need
finals.
yeah, on LeBron's coattails, where the casual fan probably can't name more than three guys on that team.
Yeah.
So I just it gives me very much the early career Cleveland vibes in terms of how this team's being built. They're too Luca centric, and I think management needs to either speak to Luca and like they need to get some sort of system there. Because when I watch them
I
play,
just want to ask, what do you think? Because nobody wanted to trade for Porzingis. I feel like everybody goes to Washington now to just be a salary dump.
yeah, but I think they could have got more. Like I know it was rumored that the Raptors were giving them Goran Dragic and a first round pick, and there's probably some salary filler in there to make it work. Now, if that's true and that trade was on the table, I did read that the Raptors were hesitant to take on long term salary, and KP's got 2 years left, about 70 million on his deal. So I get that. But if that was true and that was offered, listen, Goran and Luca got history. They want to play together. Dallas wants Goran on the team anyways, in terms of
Yeah,
like connection.
they both play for the same national team and they're good friends outside of the year.
Yeah, I think it's Slovenia that they both play
Yeah.
for. Um, but you get a first round pick for Luca for KP, and you get to move off that contract. I'm taking that over the Dinwiddie's been terrible all year. He's been horrendous, and Davis
I
Bertans
think
is
if that
probably
was offered, I think they would have taken it. I'm not sure if it was.
yeah. It was just reported, but
Yeah.
we don't know if it was or we don't know if how exactly it went down. But all I know is Dinwiddie's been terrible this year, and he nobody wanted him on Washington because of locker room issues. And Davis Bertans is probably one of the most toxic like just terrible contracts in the NBA right now. Just horrible. Like he is not producing. He's got 4 years, 80 million on his contract, and he has 3 years left. This is year one of that deal. So this doesn't really move. The, like Dallas off KP's money. It just distributes it to two people who aren't really contributing. Like I'm not sure I understand this trade for Dallas at all. And somebody at Dallas has got to tell Luca like, look, we need a system. This can't it can't be Luca ball all the time because it might be fun to watch. It might be great for Luca to put up numbers, but it's not. I'm sure it's not fun for the players on the team, and I'm sure this style can't. It's not conducive to winning. Like they're not going to win a championship going this route. So that was my key takeaway for that trade. I just didn't think it was a good trade at all, and I was really confused as to what Dallas is doing. But I think another big trade that I really liked for the Pacers was getting Halliburton, Buddy Hield, and Tristan Thompson for Sabonis, Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb, and a second round pick. Tyrese, I don't know what Sacramento is doing, giving up Tyrese Halliburton. That kid is the best player on their team by every metric in terms of advanced stats, analytics, whatever you want to call it. He is going to be a stud. He's 22 years old, still on a rookie deal.
Yep.
He was the only player on that roster that should have been untouchable. But they go ahead and give him away to Sacramento.
Yep.
I mean to Indiana for Sabonis, who what doesn't move the needle for them. He doesn't do anything for that team. I just don't understand that trade even a little bit. No idea what Sacramento is doing. They're lost. That franchise, perennial loser, terrible ownership, terrible management, just
It's
atrocious. Terrible deadline.
it's funny how it works out because I don't know if you remember a few years ago, like Buddy Hield was the guy they absolutely wanted to get and trade at all costs, and he they packaged him away in
Yeah,
this deal.
that the Stauskas thing, like just horrendous organization. I don't know what they're doing. I don't get it. That trade makes no
Um,
sense to me.
yeah, I mean, it's two teams that are pretty irrelevant right now. Good deal for the Pacers. To be honest, if I was Indiana, I would have rather had Sabonis on my roster instead of Miles Turner. Because I know they were shopping around both and trying to figure out which piece they wanted to move forward with. And I think just Domantas Sabonis is a more skilled player, more versatile than Miles Turner is, and he's usually healthier because Miles Turner gets injured every single year.
Yeah,
Um, and even for big Miles Turner, he never averages more than 10 rebounds a season, like not even close for a guy who's 7 feet tall. Um,
yeah. No, I agree with you. I'm dumbfounded. Like I'm at a loss for words for how stupid this is.
It's one of those like it's bottom feeder teams making a deal. Like at least they gave up like big pieces in this one, but it's like I forget there was a year like a couple years ago where Greg Monroe got moved for like nothing on like two bottom teams in the East and the West, and it's like okay, this is just like a trade for making a trade. Like who cares? Um, I, I really don't care too much about it. Sacramento, I guess they're all in on De'Aaron Fox moving forward with him, right? Or
Yeah,
I
I
think
don't know
he's had
about
a
that.
pretty bad season this year, anyways.
He
But they
has
they must really love Domantas Sabonis,
clearly because they gave up their best player, and for a guy
and
who doesn't move
he's
the
fitting in
needle,
well right now. He had a pretty good game.
he had a
His
great
first
game.
one.
I think it was last
Yeah,
night. He hit a great game with
yeah.
Indiana, 25 points or something, efficient from the field. I don't know. In Indiana, all I know is Indiana. Whatever you did there, you got to steal. You got a great kid in Halliburton. He's going to be he's a real deal. I want to quickly, as we wrap up our first episode, I want to talk about the Lakers. I think everybody talked about the Lakers. Everybody knows what's going on with Westbrook and the fit issues with the Lakers. They are struggling. They lost again last night to Golden State in a nail biter. It was a good game, but they lost by 2 points. LeBron missed some clutch free throws at the end. I know Skip Bayless gonna have a field day with that.
Already has saw his Twitter.
Yeah. So, what do you think about the Lakers staying pat at the deadline? Reports coming out that AD and LeBron don't agree with the Lakers front office for staying standing pat.
Yeah, sure. I can make it quick. So for LeBron and AD not agreeing with that, one, it's not their job, right? Obviously, the front office has to do their job, and they got AD for LeBron. But what's the front office really going to do? It's that 2027 pick. I heard that's like the main point the Lakers don't want to get rid of. But at the same time, LeBron has different motives. Like the moment LeBron leaves this team, I think they just go back to when Kobe in his later years, where like no superstar really wanted to play with him, and then after he retired, it's just Lakers become kind of irrelevant until like a superstar wants to sign in LA. Because right now, I think the Lakers are in a really tough spot right now where they know they're not good enough to win and they won't be anytime soon if they keep just, trying to make a deal to fix the now. But every move they've made like this last 6 months or so hasn't really moved the needle for them at all.
Yeah,
And it's funny how it all imploded now because they lost to Phoenix in the first round of the playoffs. But we saw when Anthony Davis was healthy, the Lakers were absolutely cooking them. Like it wasn't even close. So they
I don't know.
realistically,
I disagree
no,
with
no,
that.
when they went up 2 games to one, there was like they just absolutely killed them in the paint. Those 2 games they won when AD was there and healthy. And after that, the whole series fell apart. So they competed with them, and Phoenix was the best team in the West that year that represented them. So they weren't far off from being a finals contender. But what they absolutely did now, they just ruined it. And I can't really blame the front office for not making a move this trade deadline because there's nothing you can do with what you have right now that'll fix everything by
You know what?
February 10th.
I think the Lakers, they should have traded for John Wall. Not because I think John Wall is a better fit or a better player than Russell Westbrook currently, although that's debatable. I think Westbrook's mentality is very Allen Iverson-esque in terms of not wanting to, and Carmelo Anthony-esque in terms of not wanting to come off the bench. I'm a legacy, this and that. I deserve to start. And Westbrook's made those comments in the media, and I think
You know what though? I feel bad for him. He's gonna take all the blame for this season.
but they needed to make a trade for the sake of a shakeup, for the sake of giving the team mentally new life, increase their morale. Team morale's terrible right now.
That's fine, but say they ended up dealing Russ, got Wall, or personally, I think it would have been better if they got Kevin Love because he's played with LeBron before. Similar value on the contract to Russ. If he was actually gettable, LeBron probably would have been better off with that than John Wall. But like, say they ended up trading Russ and like the season doesn't change at all, they fall to like 10 games below 500. Then who starts taking the blame? Like at least this is kind of like a smokescreen for LeBron and AD. It's like okay, obviously the Russ experiment didn't work. We'll retune up next year, see what we can do.
I think Russ got a player option for next year, right? There's no way he's opting out of that. It's
He
47
isn't, but
million.
then that's another year you can fall back. It's like, oh, man, management, they got Russ.
I just think the Lakers are in trouble. I think they needed to do something, and doing
But you know
nothing
what?
doesn't solve the
I
problem.
I still think they can compete in the West. It
I
all comes
don't.
down to Russell Westbrook being self-aware and changing his game.
Yeah, look, self-awareness it's a life skill. It's an underrated life
But
skill,
like a
and I
change in attitude from him can make them a playoff contender.
but you're asking for a guy to change an attitude who's never shown that he could. So I just like I think that might be asking for a lot. Like I just don't think that. I mean, you know what? Kudos to Frank Vogel. He's not getting enough credit for benching Westbrook.
Actually,
And
you know what? I got a question for you.
yeah,
Because all the media say like what an atrocity this Lakers team is and stuff like that. LeBron can't do anything with this. Do you think this is worse than his Cleveland teams?
no, not even close. I just think LeBron's not as good.
I think so too.
I just
But they're
think
saying he can absolutely do nothing with the team, and it's like I know Russ is the main problem. He's got to be more self-aware, but yeah, they just don't play defense on the team.
LeBron's counting stats are good, but his impact is not what it used to be. He can't control games the way he used to be, and like he takes too many possessions off on defense and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think the Lakers are in trouble. I think given their current roster,
I
I
think
just
I got another question then, just one more on that one with the counting stats.
yeah.
Do you think I know he passed Kareem for total points now,
Yes, he did
but do you
last
think
night.
when he actually passes that regular season mark, that LeBron will put more of an effort on the defensive end?
No
Because I
chance.
think once he breaks that point record, it's never going to get touched. Because I think eventually the NBA is going to shift from like an 82 game season and go down to 70. So it's just going to be harder and less opportunity for anyone to break that cumulative record.
Yeah, I don't think he puts any more effort on defense. Not because defense is not valuable. I think because basketball is more offense than it is defense. I think great offense still beats good defense. And I think defense just isn't as sexy. Like I think LeBron, yeah, even if he beats the point record, he's gonna want to widen that gap to leave his mark. I think that's his. I think that's the final nail that he has left for the coffin of the goat argument in terms of his own side, like his own argument. And I think the more
Like
he
for what
widens
he can actually do
for what he can actually
at this
accomplish. I
stage. Yeah.
I think the days of him winning a championship as the lead player, counting stats, yeah, he might be the best player, but
Well, you know what? If you want to go GOAT argument, no team
let's not
lower
let's not get
than
into that. Let's not
no,
get
no,
into that.
no team lower than a 6 seed or 7 seed. I think it's 6 seed Houston Rockets has ever won a championship. If Russ becomes more self-aware and they're able to turn this thing around and he can win a championship with an LA team as like a 9 or 10 seed, that's another thing, he can look forward to as, something that's no one's ever done. But that's completely hypothetical, but I just want to bring it up here in case it happens.
I think that's wishful thinking. They're light years away right now from winning a championship. They're not even close. And I think, you know, this is the last point I'm going to bring up before we wrap up this first episode. But AD looked a little checked out last night, to be honest, man. There was plays where the Lakers were competing, they were fighting, they were playing well. AD was getting a rest on the bench. He just looked completely disengaged and disinterested. Just pointing it out. You know, it probably doesn't mean anything. I'm probably looking too much into it, but he looked a little disinterested to me. So,
Yeah.
anyways, I think this was a great first episode in my opinion. Had a ton of fun doing this.
Oh, me too.
I hope our viewers feel the same way. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, be on the lookout. We're gonna try to release episodes weekly, hopefully, with new content every week and new topics to discuss. And you get to hear our unfiltered opinion on what's going on in the NBA, maybe things that you don't get to hear in mainstream media. So thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it, and that's the wrap on the first episode of the 3 and D podcast. Keep a lookout for next week. Take care, guys.